So what is your lactate threshold and why should you care? Now, your lactate threshold is essentially the maximum amount of effort that you can sustain for a prolonged period of time without building up lactic acid in your blood, which means that you will start slowing down. Now, I just did a lactate threshold test on my Garmin watch yesterday, and I want to bring you through the details and exactly why I think you should do a lactate threshold test if you're preparing for a race or any other kind of cardiovascular event. Now, if we look at the screen, what we're going to find here, I'm pulling up the Garmin homepage, the Garmin Connect homepage. I use a Garmin Fenix 7. I'm sure that other, especially the Forerunners and the different Garmin running watches in particular, will give you all the same data. I'm not 100% sure, but you'd have to look that up on your own and on your own computer. What you can find here, if I go to the activities, let's go ahead and look at the run that I just did yesterday. So as you can see here, August 30th, Crown Point FTP test. Now, this says FTP, but this is the lactate threshold test. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull up all the information from your run. Now, my computer is very slow, so bear with me. But it'll pull up your distance, your time, your average pace, your ascent, your calories that you burned. I ran for 32 minutes, 3.73 miles. That was the trail that I did right there. And then it's going to pull up all of this information. Now, on the lactate threshold test with the Garmin, what they're going to have you follow that I'm going to point out right here is in the heart rate ranges. So the way that the test is structured, number one, you do need a actual chest strap heart rate monitor. So on the right side there, you see I use the HRM Pro. What they have you do is warm up for 10 minutes at just a normal warm-up pace. Once you get done with that 10-minute warm-up, you're supposed to hit the lap button on your watch, and that will start the beginning of the lactate threshold test. What they want you to do is find a target heart rate range at about 162 beats per minute. So as you can see, that red line is my actual heart rate, and then this gray is the range that they wanted me in. So I kept my heart rate right at about 162. It's pretty solid on this first one. Then they have you drop down to a target range for 4 minutes at 147. They give you a range with all of this. So for this one, the range was 137 to 157. Right at 147 is where you want to be. And I was a little high on that, but it was still decent, staying below 157, which was within the range that they wanted me at. After 4 minutes there, they want you to bump it up to between 157 to 177, which will bring you to 167, I'm sorry, which will bring you to 162 target range. I kept that pretty good. Then they bump you up again for another 4 minutes at 177 as a high end, 167 to 177, which will bring you at a target range of 172. And then for the last 3 minutes of the test, they want you basically all out. They want you at a target range of 182. So between 177 and 187. And by this point, you've already been running for a while. Your heart rate is jacked up. Now you're going to push that pace, push the sprint, and you're going to push really, really hard here. I was literally gasping for air by the end of this test. When I finished it out, they have you do 3 minutes there, and I had a hard time getting my heart rate that high, to be honest with you. I did not perform as well on this as I thought that I would be able to, because ideally, I'm able to get my heart rate up to 187 and to sustain that pace for 3 minutes, because that's the high end of the range. If I can do that, then they know that in terms of what my lactate threshold is and how much lactic acid I can build up without gassing out is going to be higher. So after I finished this out, it kept buzzing me and it told me I need to get my heart rate higher. It told me like 3 times within those 3 minutes. And then by the end, I finally got in that range. I was about 182, 180. It wasn't super great. And then I walked for the cool down just back to where I started. So along with all of this data, it's going to give you a ton of other stuff. Stride length, performance condition, running cadence, vertical ratio, vertical oscillation, respiration rate, ground contact time, the temperature outside, the stamina, just a bunch of different stuff. It gives you your running time and your walking time. As you can see right there at the end, I was walking. And then it's going to give you all of these different stats on the bottom. What it's also going to tell you is your time in your zones. So Zone 2. Now, Garmin does this a little differently than what you might think of as Zone 2, because they have a Zone 1. So Zone 1 is like what they call warm-up, so it's between 99 beats per minute to 117. I think that's a little ridiculous. I think it's kind of a waste of a zone. They should just be zone 1 right here, 118 to 137, and then zone 2 should be actual zone 2, which is your aerobic zone. This is where you want to do 80% of your training if you're running, if you're doing distance running, any kind of stuff like that, because at the end of the day, you need to run slower so that you can run faster. And this is becoming more and more popular over the years. MAF training, max aerobic function, the Maffetone method, whatever you want to call it. This zone 2 range is where you're spending about 80% of your running time, your training time. And then you're going to spend only 20% in the anaerobic and high aerobic end of things, where you're actually pushing it on your tempo runs, you're doing sprint intervals, things like that. So as you can see here, they had me right at my threshold for the majority of the time. So this run was 36 minutes long with a 10-minute warm-up. 16 minutes of that was spent in my threshold zone, and then 2 minutes was spent at that maximum heart rate range. So when I press stop on the test, it then will prompt you to update your heart rate zones. And say yes, because then what it will do is not just use a random calculation to figure out what your lactate threshold is and your zones are, your heart rate zones. It will actually use real data that you have input into the system to calculate new heart rate zones for you based on how you perform on this test. What I want to pull you over here to next is going to be my actual lactate threshold. So you're going to go to reports, you're going to go all the way down to running, and you're going to find lactate threshold. And on the lactate threshold graph, this is the first one that I've done, so this is the only one that it's measured so far. It's going to tell you what you can sustain for a prolonged period of time. So this is basically what you can expect for your race. Because race day, we're not going to be running in zone 2. We're going to be pushing it. So on race day, this is kind of what you can expect based on your most recent threshold test, FTP, whatever you want to call it. So based on my FTP test, my threshold test, they are telling me that I can expect to sustain a 173 heart rate, which will bring me to about a 737 minute per mile pace, which is really interesting data to know if you're preparing for a run, because ideally you are getting those ranges higher. Ideally, at the end of this training program, when I'm all done and I'm ready to go for this half marathon, my heart rate range that I could stay in would be a little higher, like 177, and then that pace would be a little lower, like 720, okay? So ideally, I'm bringing that pace down and I'm bringing that heart rate up that I can sustain for a long period of time without building lactic acid in the blood and eventually having to slow down. This test was really informative. I really love doing it. It's going to help me out big time during all my training, and hopefully it'll give me a good race predictor for that day and a good pace to shoot for when I start on that start line, so I can cross the finish line knowing that I pushed at my body's extent with all I could do, especially for those distance runs. If I'm doing a 5K and I'm just sprinting and I'm just going for it, then that's great. But if you're doing something that you need to pace yourself and you need long sustained effort, this is going to be a really good tell of where you should be aiming for your race. So if you found this video helpful, thank you so much for watching. Again, hit subscribe, hit the like button, comment and let me know where you think I was wrong, if I messed anything up, for all you professionals out there. Like I said, this is something I'm kind of just digging into, all this cardiovascular stuff, and I love learning about it. I love all the data that the Garmin is giving me, and I want to be able to share that with you guys and hopefully help you PR your next race. So if you like the content, let me know. Thanks.